Welcome back, coin collectors and treasure hunters. Today, we are taking a fascinating journey through the world of United Kingdom 50 new pence coins, focusing on 5 examples that deserve special attention because of their dates, designs, production numbers, condition, and collector appeal. The British 50p has been one of the country's most collected decimal coins since its introduction in 1969, and although many older examples are common, certain dates and varieties can stand out dramatically from the rest. The Royal Mint confirms that more than 100 different 50p designs have entered circulation over the years, making this denomination an exciting area for collectors. Let's get started. First up, the United Kingdom 1973 50 pence, featuring the famous design commemorating Britain's entry into the European Economic Community, or EEC. If you have a 1973 50 pence sitting in an old collection, coin jar, drawer, or inherited box, you may be wondering whether its age and historical importance make it valuable today. This particular example is described as being in fine condition, meaning it shows noticeable circulation wear but still retains its important design details. While the ordinary 1973 circulation coin was produced in a very large quantity, it remains highly interesting to collectors because of its historic status as Britain's first commemorative 50p issue. Current catalogue and market references put circulated examples generally around the face value to low dollar range, while exceptionally preserved or proof examples can bring considerably more. The story of the 1973 50 pence begins with one of the most important political moments in modern British history. On the 1st of January, 1973, the United Kingdom officially joined the European Economic Community. To commemorate this event, a special 50 pence coin was produced with a completely different reverse design from the regular Britannia 50p. The coin became the first commemorative 50p issued by the Royal Mint, giving it an important place in the history of British decimal coinage. The reverse features 9 clasp hands arranged around the denomination and date, representing the enlarged European community of 9 member states following the 1973 enlargement. The coin was struck in copper nickel, weighs approximately 13.5 grams, and measures about 30 millimeters across. The production figure is one of the most important facts to understand when discussing its value. Around 89.775 million circulation examples were struck. That is a very large mintage, so the ordinary circulated 1973 50 pence should not be described as an extremely rare coin simply because it is more than 50 years old. Instead, its greatest appeal comes from its history, distinctive design, age, and importance to collectors building complete British 50p collections. The coin was eventually demonetized along with the original large-sized 50p pieces in 1998, but many examples survived in collections and private holdings. One of the most exciting features of this coin is the reverse design. The 9 hands form a powerful visual symbol of cooperation between the member countries of the European Economic Community. The date 1973 appears prominently in the center, together with the denomination 50 pence. The 7-sided shape immediately identifies it as one of Britain's original large-format 50p coins. On the obverse is the young portrait of Queen Elizabeth II by Arnold Machin, a portrait that appeared on many British decimal coins of the period. Another fascinating detail is that the 1973 issue is unusual within the early decimal series because its reverse inscription simply says 50 pence, rather than 50 new pence. This makes the coin particularly interesting to collectors who enjoy small design differences and historical details. Its combination of the large 7-sided format, the young Queen Elizabeth II portrait, the 9-hand EEC reverse, and the single-year 1973 design makes it instantly recognizable. Now let's talk about rarity, because this is where collectors need to separate historical importance from true scarcity. A fine condition 1973 EEC 50 pence is not considered rare in the strict numismatic sense because millions were produced. However, that does not mean collectors have no interest in it. Quite the opposite. It is an essential coin for many collectors who want to build a complete collection of British commemorative 50p pieces. Catalogue references show that fine examples can command a modest premium over face value depending on the marketplace, while better preserved pieces become increasingly desirable. For a coin in fine condition, natural circulation wear is completely normal. Collectors will look at the clarity of the date, the 9 hands, lettering, Queen Elizabeth II portrait, and the overall surface. A naturally worn coin can still be attractive because it tells the story of having actually circulated during the early years of Britain's decimal era. What collectors generally want to avoid is artificial damage or aggressive cleaning. A coin that has been heavily polished can lose some of its natural character and collector appeal, so, how much could a 1973 50 pence in fine condition actually be worth? Current reference data gives a useful indication. Numista lists the 1973 issue around 78 cents in fine condition, with higher grades reaching approximately $1.10, $1.40, and around $2.20 depending on preservation. NGC's World Coin Guide similarly shows modest values for circulated grades, with the strongest premiums appearing as condition improves. That means an ordinary fine condition example should realistically be thought of as a low-dollar collector coin rather than a multi-thousand-dollar rarity. A reasonable market discussion would place many fine examples at roughly $1 or less to a few dollars, depending on the exact condition, buyer interest, provenance, and selling venue. Exceptional uncirculated examples can move higher, with some references placing high-quality pieces around several dollars. A documented auction result for an uncirculated 1973 example was approximately $5.84, showing how preservation can make a difference. The really interesting comparison comes with the proof versions. A certified high-grade 1973 proof has achieved substantially more. For example, PCGS records a 1973 EEC proof graded PR68 that sold for $165. That is dramatically different from an ordinary fine circulation coin and demonstrates why collectors. Next up, the United Kingdom 50 new pence coin dated 1977, specifically an example in dirty and circulated condition. At first glance, a worn or dirty coin may not look particularly valuable, but older British coins can still attract collectors because of their history, design, date, and place in the development of modern British decimal currency. The 1977 50 new pence is especially interesting because it belongs to the early era of Britain's decimal coinage and was issued during the Silver Jubilee year of Queen Elizabeth II. So, if you have one of these coins sitting in an old collection, box, drawer, or jar, don't dismiss it simply because it looks dirty. Let's explore its history, design, rarity, collector demand, and realistic market value in today's dollars. The 1977 50 new pence was part of Britain's early decimal coinage system, which had been introduced in 1971. The 50p denomination was already familiar to the British public by 1977, and the coin continued to feature the famous Britannia reverse design. The 1977 issue was produced in substantial numbers, with around 49.5 million regular circulation examples recorded, while a much smaller number were produced in proof form. The coin was struck in copper-nickel, weighs approximately 13.5 grams, and has a diameter of about 30 millimeters. The year 1977 itself is historically important because Britain celebrated Queen Elizabeth II's Silver Jubilee, marking 25 years of her reign. This gives the coin additional historical interest for collectors who specialize in Elizabeth II coinage and British decimal currency. One of the most recognizable features of the 1977 50 new pence is the Britannia design on the reverse. Britannia is shown seated with her traditional symbols, including a trident and shield, creating an instantly recognizable image associated with British coinage. The obverse carries the second portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, designed by Arnold Machin, together with the denomination and inscriptions associated with the period. The words new pence are particularly important because they identify this coin as part of Britain's early decimal era. The combination of the young Queen's portrait, Britannia, the 50 denomination, and the words new pence makes this coin a wonderful representation of an important transitional period in British monetary history. Now let's talk about rarity, because this is where collectors need to be realistic. The standard 1977 circulation issue is not considered an extremely rare coin because millions were produced. A mintage of roughly 49.5 million means that ordinary circulated examples can still be found today. However, rarity is not the only factor that determines collector interest. Condition, originality, attractive surfaces, strong strikes, unusual errors, and proof status can make particular examples much more interesting. A dirty circulated example therefore should not automatically be described as a rare coin. Instead, its strongest appeal is its age, historical connection, recognizable design, and place within a complete collection of British 50p coins. For a coin in dirty condition, collector demand generally depends on how much detail remains visible and whether the dirt is simply surface grime or whether the coin has suffered permanent corrosion, scratches, stains, or other damage. If the coin still has clear lettering, a recognizable date, a strong portrait, and visible Britannia details, it can remain a useful addition to a collection. In fact, collectors building date runs of early British decimal coins may specifically want a 1977 example to complete their sets. The key point is that a dirty coin and a rare coin are not necessarily the same thing. The dirt may make the coin look less attractive, but the date and historical identity can still make it collectible. So, what about the current market value in dollars? Available market guides provide a useful indication. Numista currently lists indicative values for regular 1977 examples ranging through roughly 65 cents to $3.20 depending on grade, while Ferronum gives a broader approximate range of about $1.61 to $6.88 depending on condition. These figures are guide values rather than guaranteed auction prices. For a genuinely dirty, circulated example, a realistic expectation would generally be toward the lower end of the market rather than the prices associated with brilliant uncirculated or proof pieces. The important lesson is that condition can make a major difference. Higher grade certified examples can bring considerably more attention. PCGS records an auction result of $10 for an NGC MS68 example of the 1977 50 new pence, while another 1977 50p listing records a $44.99 auction result for an NGC MS67 example under a different catalogued variety. These results demonstrate why collectors should separate an ordinary dirty circulation coin from an exceptionally preserved, professionally graded example. A worn coin should not be valued using the price of a top-grade certified specimen. Instead, look carefully at the actual condition and any unusual characteristics before estimating its value. If you own a dirty 1977 50 new pence, one of the most important tips is to avoid aggressive cleaning. Do not polish it with household chemicals, abrasive materials, metal polish, or rough cloths. Cleaning can leave scratches and unnatural surfaces, potentially reducing collector appeal. Instead, preserve the coin as you found it unless you understand proper numismatic conservation. Examine the date, lettering, portrait, Britannia design, edge, and overall surface under good lighting. Look for unusual doubling, off-center striking, clipped planchets, die problems, or other genuine minting abnormalities. A normal dirty coin may have modest value, but an authentic major mint error can be much more interesting to collectors. It is also worth comparing your coin with photographs of authenticated examples and checking multiple market sources before selling. Remember that an asking price on an online marketplace is not the same thing as a confirmed auction sale. Real collector demand is best judged through actual completed sales, professional grading information, and established numismatic references. The 1977 50 new pence is a particularly enjoyable coin for collectors because it connects early British decimalisation with the historic Silver Jubilee year of Queen Elizabeth II. Even when an individual. Next up, the United Kingdom 50 new pence coin dated 1979, specifically an example in circulated condition. At first glance, this coin may look like an ordinary piece of old British pocket change, but coins like this can be surprisingly interesting because they combine British history, classic Britannia imagery, and the changing world of decimal currency. The important point for collectors is that the 1979 50 new pence is not considered an extremely rare circulation coin simply because of its age. Around 58.68 million examples were struck for circulation, so its value depends heavily on condition, eye appeal, varieties, errors, provenance, and whether the coin is an ordinary circulation strike or a scarce proof or special example. To understand this coin, we have to go back to the development of Britain's decimal currency. The 50 pence denomination was introduced in 1969, ahead of Britain's decimalisation in 1971. The large seven-sided shape immediately made the denomination distinctive and easy to recognise. The reverse design featured Britannia, the traditional personification of Britain, created by designer Christopher Ironside, while the obverse carried the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II. The 1979 issue belongs to this important early period of British decimal coinage, making it an attractive historical piece for collectors building complete date runs of the early 50 new pence series. The 1979 50 new pence has several features that make it instantly recognizable. It is a large, seven-sided cupronickel coin, with a diameter of approximately 30 mm and a weight of about 13.5 grams. The reverse displays Britannia seated beside a lion, holding her traditional symbols, while the denomination and the words new pence identify the coin as part of Britain's early decimal era. On the obverse is the second portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, designed by Arnold Machin. For collectors, these design details are important because they establish exactly which type of 50p is being examined and help separate an ordinary 1979 circulation coin from proof or unusual varieties. Now let's talk about rarity, because this is where collectors need to be realistic. The 1979 circulation issue had a reported mintage of approximately 58.68 million pieces. That is a substantial number, meaning an ordinary circulated 1979 50 new pence should not automatically be described as a rare coin. However, rarity is not the only factor that creates collector interest. Millions of coins were released into everyday circulation, and many experienced decades of handling, scratching, surface marks, discoloration, and general wear. Collectors searching for attractive examples from the early decimal era can still appreciate a well-preserved specimen, while coins with unusual minting characteristics or exceptional grades can attract much stronger attention. If your particular 1979 50 new pence is circulated or damaged, do not assume that it has a spectacular auction value simply because it is nearly 50 years old. For an ordinary circulated example, market references generally place the coin close to face value rather than in the hundreds or thousands of dollars. Numista's current indicative figures for the 1979 circulation issue range from roughly 36 cents in lower grades to around $1.20 in uncirculated condition, although these are guide figures based on user evaluations and online sales rather than guaranteed prices. Another British coin price guide similarly notes that circulated decimal coins are generally worth face value, while higher grade examples can bring modest premiums. So, what could your circulated 1979 50 new pence actually be worth in dollars? For a normal circulated coin with ordinary wear and no major error, a realistic collector market expectation is generally around 50 cents to $1.50, depending on condition and buyer demand. A particularly attractive circulated example with strong details and pleasing surfaces may perform toward the upper end of that range, while a heavily worn or damaged coin may trade for approximately its basic face value equivalent. These figures should be treated as market indications rather than guaranteed auction prices because coin prices change according to grade, buyer interest, location, and the specific marketplace. The situation becomes much more interesting if the coin turns out not to be an ordinary circulated strike. The 1979 50 new pence also exists as a proof issue, with a reported mintage of only about 81,000 pieces. Certified high-grade proof examples can command significantly more than ordinary circulation coins. For example, PCGS records a 1979 NGC PR67 proof example that sold at auction on eBay for $39 in November 2020. This is a perfect illustration of why collectors should examine their coins carefully before deciding that an old 1979 50 pence is simply common pocket change. For collectors, the best strategy is to inspect the coin under good lighting and avoid cleaning it. Look carefully at the date, the Queen's portrait, Britannia, the lettering, the edge, and the overall surface. Pay special attention to anything that looks genuinely unusual, such as an apparent striking error, an unusual design feature, or evidence that the coin may be a proof rather than a normal circulation strike. Do not polish or chemically clean the coin in an attempt to make it look newer, because aggressive cleaning can reduce its desirability among collectors. If you believe you have an unusual or exceptionally preserved example, professional identification and grading may be worth considering. Point one of the biggest lessons from the 1979 50 new pence is that age alone does not make a coin rare. Collectors look at the complete story: mintage, survival, condition, rarity of the variety, errors, finish, demand, and documented sales. The Royal Mint itself describes the 50 pence as Britain's most collected coin denomination, and its long history includes numerous designs that have become important collector pieces. That broad collector interest helps explain why early 50 pence coins continue to receive attention even when a particular date is not especially scarce. If you have a 1979 50 new pence in circulated condition sitting in an old collection, don't throw it away and don't assume it is worthless. It is a genuine piece of Britain's early decimal history and an important date for anyone collecting the classic. Next up, the United Kingdom 1976 50 new pence, especially an example in fine condition. At first glance, this large classic 50p may look like an ordinary circulated coin, but its historical importance, traditional Britannia design, and place in the early years of Britain's decimal currency make it an interesting addition to a collection. The 1976 issue was produced in a substantial circulation quantity of approximately 43.75 million pieces, so it should not be described as an extremely rare regular circulation coin. However, condition, striking quality, varieties, and collector interest can make individual examples more desirable than their everyday appearance suggests. The history of this coin begins with Britain's transition to decimal currency. The 50 pence denomination was introduced as part of the United Kingdom's decimalisation programme, and the large-size 50p became one of the most recognisable British decimal coins. The 1976 issue belongs to the early generation of these coins and carries the portrait of Queen Elizabeth II designed by Arnold Machin on the obverse. On the reverse is the famous seated figure of Britannia, carrying her trident and shield, with the denomination and date completing the design. The coin was struck in cupronickel and has a diameter of about 30 mm and a weight of approximately 13.5 grams. These specifications give the 1976 50 new pence a substantial presence compared with many later British decimal coins. Point one of the most attractive features of the 1976 50 new pence is its classic Britannia reverse. Britannia has represented Britain for centuries, and her appearance on this early decimal coin connects modern British currency with a much older national tradition. Collectors also appreciate the original large-size format of the early 50p pieces because it clearly distinguishes them from the smaller 50p coins introduced decades later. The 1976 date is particularly interesting because it sits within the first decade of decimal coinage and represents an important period in the development of Britain's modern currency. For collectors building a complete date collection of early British 50p coins, this issue is an essential piece. Now let's talk about rarity and collector demand, particularly when the coin is in fine condition. A fine example will normally show noticeable circulation wear, with some details of Britannia and Queen Elizabeth II softened through use. That does not remove its historical appeal. In fact, collectors who focus on circulated British decimal coins often enjoy finding examples that genuinely pass through everyday commerce. The important point is that the standard 1976 circulation issue is not considered exceptionally scarce. Major coin references record a mintage of 43,746,500, and collector guides generally give the regular issue a relatively modest collectability rating. When discussing damaged or heavily circulated examples, collectors should separate genuine historical interest from claims of extraordinary rarity. Scratches, discoloration, dents, cleaning, and other damage usually do not automatically make a normal 1976 50p valuable. However, an attractive fine example with clear date details, a strong portrait, recognizable Britannia features, and pleasing overall surfaces can still be desirable as part of a collection. The real excitement begins when an apparently ordinary coin shows an unusual minting characteristic, error, variety, or exceptionally strong preservation. Those features can change the collecting story considerably and may create additional demand. So, what could a 1976 50 new pence in fine condition actually be worth in today's market? Published collector data provides a useful reality check. Foronum lists an indicative fine value of around $1.13, with values varying by grade, while its overall range for this issue is approximately 65 cents to $4.22. These figures are indications rather than guaranteed auction prices. Another market guide notes that circulated British decimal coins are generally close to face value, while uncirculated examples can command a premium. In other words, a normal fine condition 1976 50 new pence is generally a modest value collectible rather than a coin worth thousands or millions of dollars. The auction market becomes more interesting when we look at higher grade certified examples. PCGS records an auction result of $44.99 for an NGC MS66 example sold through eBay in October 2022. That result demonstrates how dramatically condition and certification can influence the market compared with an ordinary circulated coin. There is also a separate proof version of the 1976 issue. PCGS records a PR66 proof example that sold for $29 in an October 2020 eBay auction. These results should not be confused with the value of a normal fine condition circulation coin, but they show why collectors should always identify the exact version and grade before estimating value. If you have one of these coins, the first thing to do is examine it carefully under good lighting. Look closely at the date, the Queen's portrait, Britannia, the lettering, the edge, and the overall surface. Do not clean the coin aggressively. Cleaning can leave scratches or an unnatural surface and may reduce collector appeal. Instead, preserve the coin exactly as you found it. If the piece appears unusually sharp for a circulated coin, has an unusual strike, or seems different from standard examples, compare it with reputable references or consider professional authentication and grading. Another important collecting tip is to keep your expectations realistic while still paying attention to unusual pieces. A 1976 50 new pence is historically interesting and worth keeping for a British decimal collection, but the ordinary fine condition example is not normally a spectacular high dollar rarity. Current published market guides place typical circulated examples around the low dollar range, while certified high-grade or special examples can reach considerably higher prices. The greatest value usually comes from the combination of scarcity, condition, authenticity, eye appeal, and genuine buyer demand. So, if you have a United Kingdom 1976 50 new pence in fine condition, don't throw it aside simply because it has circulated. This coin represents an important chapter in British monetary history, features the iconic Britannia design, and belongs to the early era. Next up, the United Kingdom 1978 50 new pence coin, specifically an example in damaged condition. At first glance, a damaged old coin may not appear especially valuable, but collectors know that age, historical importance, design, condition, and unusual characteristics can all influence interest. The 1978 50 new pence is particularly interesting because it belongs to the early era of Britain's decimal currency and carries the classic large Britannia design that many collectors immediately recognize. However, it is important to separate ordinary damaged examples from genuine varieties or mint errors. Current collector references record 72,005,500 regular strike examples dated 1978, so the normal coin is not considered extremely rare simply because of its age. The 50 new pence denomination was introduced during Britain's transition to decimal currency. The large 7-sided 50p became one of the most recognizable coins in British circulation, and the early design featured Britannia seated beside a lion, holding her trident and shield. The 1978 issue was produced during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II and used the second portrait of the Queen on the obverse. The coin was struck in copper-nickel and belongs to the large-size 50p series used before the major reduction in size that came much later. The 1978 regular issue has a recorded mintage of 72,005,500, while approximately 86,100 proof examples were produced. One of the most distinctive features of this coin is its 7-sided shape. The 1978 50 new pence measures about 30 mm across and weighs approximately 13.5 grams, with a copper-nickel composition. Its reverse carries the classic Britannia design, while the obverse features Queen Elizabeth II. The words new pence are particularly important because they identify this coin as part of the early decimal series. Collectors should also carefully examine the date, lettering, edge, portrait, and overall strike. Genuine production errors can make an otherwise common 1978 coin much more interesting. For example, a documented 1978 50p struck on a 10p planchette reached $180 at a heritage auction, showing how dramatically a genuine mint error can change the value of an ordinary date. Now let's talk about the most important part of today's video, the damaged condition. A coin with scratches, heavy wear, dents, corrosion, discoloration, or other damage normally attracts considerably less money than a sharply preserved example. That does not mean a damaged 1978 50 new pence has no collector interest. Its historical connection to Britain's early decimal era still makes it an enjoyable addition to a collection, especially for collectors building complete date sets. The key point is that damage by itself does not create rarity. In fact, the large mintage means an ordinary damaged example should generally be viewed as a collectible historical coin rather than an exceptionally rare treasure. Current Numismatics indications place ordinary 1978 examples at relatively modest values, with the figures varying by grade, while at higher-end indications apply to much better preserved examples. So, what could a damaged 1978 50 new pence actually be worth? The answer depends heavily on the severity of the damage and whether the coin has an unusual feature. For a normal circulated or damaged example, a realistic market expectation is generally around 50 cents to $2, with particularly worn pieces potentially selling around face value levels or only slightly above them. One recent auction listing for a circulated 1978 UK 50p closed at $1, which provides a useful real-world example rather than relying only on catalogue estimates. Better preserved examples can bring more, and Numismatics' current indications show substantially higher figures for superior grades, including an upper indication around $12 for a particularly high-grade example. The story changes completely if your damaged-looking coin actually contains a genuine mint error. An unusual wrong planchette strike, major off-center strike, or another authenticated production error can command significantly more than a normal circulated coin. As mentioned earlier, a 1978 50 new pence struck on a 10p planchette was recorded selling for $180 in a heritage sale. That is why collectors should never judge a coin only by its surface condition. A damaged coin can still deserve closer examination if something unusual appears to be part of the original minting process rather than damage that happened afterward. If you have a 1978 50 new pence in damaged condition, the first step is to inspect it carefully rather than immediately cleaning it. Look closely at the date, Queen Elizabeth II portrait, Britannia, the lettering, the edge, and the shape. Compare unusual marks with photographs of known mint errors. Most importantly, remember that scratches, drilled holes, cuts, bends, and chemical discoloration usually represent post-mint damage rather than valuable errors. Never polish or aggressively clean the coin, because cleaning can reduce its collector appeal. If you discover an apparently genuine major mint error, consider getting an expert opinion or professional authentication before selling it. A normal damaged example may have only modest value, but a verified variety or error can have a completely different market story. In conclusion, the 1978 United Kingdom 50 new pence is an important piece of Britain's early decimal coinage and remains a popular type for collectors interested in Queen Elizabeth II and classic Britannia designs. With more than 72 million regular strike coins produced, an ordinary damaged example should not be described as an ultra-rare coin or as a guaranteed high-value treasure. Its realistic value in damaged condition is usually modest, often around 50 cents to $2, depending on the exact condition and buyer demand. However, the possibility of a genuine mint error makes every unusual example worth examining carefully. The most exciting discoveries are often not the coins that simply look old, but the coins that contain a real and verifiable feature from the minting process. So, if you have a 1978 50 new pence sitting in an old collection, Don't throw it away. Examine it, protect it, compare it with reliable references. Discovery, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more fascinating UK coin discoveries, rare dates, mint errors, and valuable coins. Keep checking your old coins, you never know what you might find.